so pleased, Laila and I are so pleased to be here with these amazing authors. And we are going to dive right into our questions, and we will leave some time at the end of the panel for you to ask them your own questions. And Laila, I'm going to let you take the first question.
Okay. So this is more of like a general question for all the authors. But while reading these books, I couldn't help but wonder if any of these stories resonate with an experience or something you've had in your life.
And if you want to, when you start answering the question, if you want to actually say who you are and what book you...
Do you want to rock, paper, scissors to who goes first? Okay. Also, this mic is like so hot. Like not temperature-wise, like it's picking up on all that. So it's, can I read this question too? Because I'll get one. Okay, thank you. I'm one of those people who has to read a thing to get it. And also, my name is Meggie Ramm. Hi, my pronouns are they, them. I work on the kids comic series Batcat. It's about a tiny little non-binary bat who's also a cat. And since I'm a non-binary person and my character is also non-binary, it's pretty much the experiences that I've had. I was really lucky in that I had a publisher see the character and then be like, we really like this character, can you make a story out of it? And I was like, awesome, I'm just gonna make it based on being non-binary and, you know, having people, especially when I was growing up in rural Michigan, non-binary was not a thing. And so it was very much, you were either a tom girl or, you know, called some less nice names. And I wanted to give Batcat the ability to just go through this story and realize that no matter what, when people give you options, you can always come up with your own third option, whatever that option might be. So that's my answer to that question. And now I'm gonna give it over to one of these guys.
Okay, all right. Hi everyone, my name is LaCour. I am the author of the Josephine series. And this book also resonates for my life for sure. I have lived, so the first book in the series is called Josephine in the apartment house on Poppy Hill. And it's about a 9-year-old girl who lives in an apartment with a bunch of neighbors. And I have lived in, well, I grew up in apartments and lived in apartments until I was, I don't even know, in my early 30s. So I spent my whole life living in apartments. And I am very fascinated with the places that we live and the people who we interact with on our daily basis. And even like the sounds that we hear through our ceilings or under our floors, and the people whose mailboxes are close to ours. And just this sense of sharing space with people, some of whom we know very, very well, and some of whom we don't really know at all. And so my main character, Josephine, knows very much about the apartment house because she's lived there since she was 9 years old. I mean, since she was born, and now she's 9 years old, so the whole first 9 years of her life. But there is a mystery upstairs, these neighbors who have lived above her head the whole time, that she has never, ever seen them. And so that's where we begin our story. We have new neighbors moving in, and then we also have these neighbors who she's never met before. So, here we go.
Hi people, I'm Annie Barrows, and I am talking today about my new series, which began with Stella and Marigold. But in answer to this question, yeah, I wrote a bunch of books about a pair of people named Ivy and Bean, and those books were, I mean, for instance, those books were more based on my life because Bean is always having problems with her older sister, and a lot of stuff is generated by the problems she has with her older sister. But then, it's the weirdest thing I ever saw. I had 2 daughters. So strange. They loved each other. They never fought. They helped each other. They shared. They played together. I didn't understand it, but that's the truth. And so I thought, what the heck? I need to celebrate this kind of sibling relationship. And so that was the genesis of Stella and Marigold, who love each other, who are great pals and teammates. Yeah, it's not personal at all.
love that so much. Oh my gosh. So my question for you all, like I was thinking about the title of today's panel, and the emphasis of pictures. And if you're not familiar with Meggie's work, Batcat is a graphic novel. And I was the type of reader that I love to read. I love to read. But when I was younger, I particularly loved a book that had pictures in it. And I would take a book off the shelf and like look to see if it had pictures in it. And if it did, it was like, okay, immediate, like put it in my library basket. And if it didn't, I had to be more convinced. So I was curious because although your book is a graphic novel, so of course, is illustrated throughout, chapter books also have illustrations. And it made me wonder, for the chapter books, how is it decided of like what scene gets the illustration? And then I was wondering in the graphic novel for you, since you're doing both, you're the author and the illustrator, like how the art comes in, like are you thinking about the art first and then putting the words to the scenes, or do you kind of write a script first and then have to illustrate it?
Do you want to start with chapter openers first? Because I actually don't know the answer to that question. Who has illustrated chapter openers? Do you guys have illustrated chapter openers?
Mine are illustrated throughout.
They're illustrated
But yeah, I guess there's a chapter. Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, there's always a picture, but I wouldn't call it a chapter opener because usually it's full page.
Do you get to pick?
Me?
Yeah, do you get to pick where the pictures are? Or does
No, it's a tough world out there. The artist and the designer pick.
Oh, they do? You don't get any input?
I do.
Okay. Sorry, I also, like, my job is as a comic book designer, and I work in book design, so just the fact that, like, they wouldn't ask the author at all, I'm like, what? No?
They ask.
They ask.
But do they listen? Not so sure.
I'm curious because you've worked with your illustrator for so long. Like, do you just make a choice to kind of stay out of it? Like, has that changed the way that?
It's changed because my illustrator is Sophie Blackall, who is just so magnificent, and she's won 2 Caldecots. She's amazing. So I would be an idiot if I told her what to do. But at this point, I write stuff because I think it'll be really fun for her to illustrate. Like there's this, starting with the second book of Stella Marigold, which is coming up, there's a character whose apartment is filled with mermaids. And there's one completely horrible mermaid candle holder where the mermaid is holding a soldier and biting it in the face. And I just put that in because I knew Sophie would think that was hilarious. So yeah, sometimes I do that, but I don't. Placement? No. Yeah, you get to do that.
Sometimes. And for, also I just had water go down the wrong tube. So for Batcat, when I'm writing it, I usually, the way that I have to work with my publishers, I have to submit a script first, which is like written description of what is happening in every panel and in every page. And you guys don't get to see that, but I'm really funny in my scripts. Or at least I like to think I am. And while that's happening, I usually do like a thumbnail of what the page looks like, so I like block out what panels are going to be on each page. So it's usually the words come first. But the problem is that sometimes I'll write something in the script and then I'll go and I'll draw it on the page, and I'm like, this is not working at all. Or like sometimes you don't want to put too many panels on a page. Like it's usually like the golden rule, which you can always break, is 5 to 7, but like one time I was like, I'm gonna put 12 on a page, and then I went to do it, and I was like, this was a mistake. So it's kind of like writing first, drawing, editing as things goes along, and you realize that you painted yourself into a corner. Because I wrote in my second book, I made skeleton mermaids. So I was like, this is gonna be hilarious. I'll make skeleton mermaids, and it'll be so much fun. Doing that, not having drawn a single skeleton mermaid yet, and like knowing if that was something that I could even do. And so then I got to those pages and I was like, all right, so skeleton mermaid, is the whole thing a skeleton? Or is it just the top half and then the bottom half is the tail? And that's what I went with because it's way less bones to draw. So sometimes I write things and then I don't know if I can draw them, and then we find that out at the time.
So can I Can I ask a question about the skeleton mermaid? Like,
Absolutely.
where does it stop being a skeleton, start being a mermaid?
It's like the top half is a skeleton, and then it connects like the spinal cord, goes into just like the bottom half of
But
the
does
thing.
it does it like go out horizontally from the...
No, I'll draw a picture for you.
Thank you.
But that is something like, and you're writing something like that, and you're like, these are questions that no one will have the answer for except me, and I'm gonna have to figure that out later.
I was thinking of like, that mermaid apartment is now gonna have a skeleton mermaid.
It's a great idea. I'm stealing it, you know.
It's fine, take it.
I think one of the great delights about writing for this age is the illustrations, because most of my books are young adult, and then I've been writing adult books, and so like the experience of having an illustrator working on my project is just so exciting to me, and to see that their interpretation of the characters is incredibly exciting, and so I don't typically, there are some moments that I really, really want to see illustrated, and so I will make a little note like in that process, like I would love to see this moment, you know, in an illustration if it works out, but for the most part I just let the illustrator do what she's doing. Yeah.
Next question. Okay, so other people may have opinions about what your story is about, but what do you think the moral and lessons or lessons of your story are?
So I learned from another panel from the writers of the Lumberjanes comic series. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of people not, which is great, and it's good, and you should read it. But one of the things that the writers for that series talked about is that every book that they work on, they wanted there to be like a really specific feeling that you felt when you were a kid, that you could relate to when you're reading the book. And I really took that to heart for Batcat. So at the moment there are 3 Batcats. And the first one, I just wanted the story to be about when, you know, people are telling you that you have to be one thing or another, and you feel like there's a third option. And is Batcat bad enough or cat enough? And it's just an allegory for non-binary, guys, that's it. And then the second book was I am absolutely terrified of sharks. I know that I'm more likely to die from a vending machine falling on me. I know all of the facts, because I have to know my enemy. But I know everything about sharks, and so the book 2 is just Batcat being scared of water, but still having to be around it, because all of my family is just full of like lake people, and they always want to go on boats and in waters and stuff, and it doesn't matter if it's a pool or an ocean, I'm sure there's a shark in there. So book 2 is just the feeling of being like really like irrationally scared of something and having to figure out how to like get through it. And then book 3 was when you're a kid and you know you're trying really hard at something, and your parents tell you if you try really, really hard at this thing, you're gonna succeed. And what happens when you try really, really hard and you aren't the winner? Which I think is something like as a kid, like you don't get told like quite as much like, hey, you know, just trying the thing and getting second place is still really cool. And then the 4th book, which I'm not gonna give away any secrets for, but it's gonna be a big one. So yeah, stay tuned and then tell me what you think of that after you read that one.
I tend to not think about morals very much when I'm writing. I am really interested in like characters and telling a good story. Those are kind of how I approach these books. But I have found that themes really emerge. And so the first book, I thought a lot about time. Like Ella is thinking a lot about how time passes, what time feels like. And then in the second book, I wrote a lot about identity. So one of the neighbors has an identity crisis, and it makes Ella think about, you know, it makes her learn that she can't fix her neighbor's problem, but she can be a good friend to her. And she also thinks a lot about her own identity and who she is in the world and who she is in her apartment house. And then in the third one, I'm talking a lot about perfection and imperfection. And so usually I start the stories and I don't really know what the theme is going to be for each book, and then something emerges, and then when it emerges, I get really excited, and then I'm able to kind of have this unifying element for each book.
That's great, actually. I would say, I think too, I don't have a moral in mind. I think like my stated purpose is to give kids a laugh, but I think that one thing that has emerged that is sort of in every book I write is my really true, sincere belief that kids are never, ever wrong in what they want, ever. And I mean that because I think grown-ups are wrong constantly, and I don't think kids are, very rarely do I think kids are wrong in what they want. So that seems to keep cropping up over and over again, just me proving that in various ways, in different stories, but I would not say that's a moral. Kids are great, grown-ups, all right.
I'm finding myself wanting to ask a very similar follow-up question as you asked Meggie about like, at what point does it change from being never wrong to being often wrong? You know, like in terms of like
Eight.
Eight is the age.
After that, let's go down.
So one of the things that cropped up when I was, so I read your books, and then I'm curious what people are saying out there. So I used a undisclosed search engine to just see, like, okay, you know, what do people say? And a word that came up quite often, and kind of no surprise, was appropriate. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. You know, how many, you know, this was obviously not a young person's review. You know, this was, you know, a parent or whatever, or a teacher maybe, who spoke about the appropriateness of your work and kind of celebrating that. And it made me wonder about, as creatives, whether or not that is kind of a word that you are thinking about as you are creating these stories. You know, they're very much, you know, we're talking about books that are considered for, you know, a younger reader. They're early reader, you know, type books. So there is that kind of concern of because there's, you know, appropriate as far as reading level, and then appropriate as far as kind of thematically. So I was just wondering if you could talk about how that enters your creative process, if at all.
Like, it happened a little bit when I first started writing the books in terms of appropriateness. I thought that I was writing for a much older audience. It turns out that my sense of humor is just the same as a 7 to 12-year-old, which I'm totally okay with. But like, in terms of content, like, I don't think that that's really come up, and that wasn't even a conversation with my publisher because in the second Batcat book, in the back matter, I was just like, let's talk about what non-binary is, and put that in there, and they weren't at any point like, ooh, I don't know, Meggie, like, let's swing and a miss. They were totally fine with me putting that in there, and I think, I don't know, I think that there's especially a lot of talk now about what kind of books belong in certain places and, you know, deserve to be out there, and which books, like, should be banned or whatever. And I think that, like, kids are so much smarter than we give them credit for. Like, they're gonna know the books that they're gonna wanna read. They're not gonna, like, go through the library and be like, ooh, Mein Kampf, like, this is a 2 of a book, I'm so interested. Like, so I think that, I don't think that, like, that hasn't really come up with the writing process or anything in terms of, I think I've made like one joke that was like an Arrested Development joke, like inside it, and my editor was like, kids aren't gonna get this, and I was like, yeah, but their parents are gonna find it hilarious. And that was like maybe the one time, but there hasn't really been like a theme, because kids have to deal with all of the same stuff that adults do, and writing, being able to put that kind of stuff into a book so that way they can encounter it in a way that makes sense to them. And I feel like that's a lot of like what we do is like trying to distill something or a feeling that in a way that like makes sense to kids. So yeah, that hasn't really come up. What about you guys?
I mean, I haven't answered. Do you want to go?
Well, we can jump around. I was just trying to set up.
You wild thing. Yeah, I think I'm with you, Meggie, in terms of the appropriateness of content is more or less dictated by who I'm writing for, because I want to make them happy. I don't want them to be unhappy. I want you to be happy. And I would also think that my books have been called inappropriate. I mean, there are people who believe that I and Bean are promulgating Wicca. It's a problem for them. I wrote a book in which I and Bean essentially solved the problem of climate change, and there were some people who found that far too radical, that they were interested in solving the problem of climate change. So yeah, I mean, it depends where you are. I think it's fantastically appropriate.
And I think that, like, on that note, I'm guessing that the people who were really angry at you were not kids. It was probably adults, right? Yeah.
It was never a kid. One time, a kid wrote to me and asked me why I considered it necessary to use the word dang. Yeah, I know. And so I said, I answered.
Yeah. And I guess I've had like hate mail from people who think that like Batcat isn't appropriate, but at the same time, like, and they have a problem with Batcat being non-binary, which I think is really funny because Batcat is somebody that I made up and is a pink like beach ball. And like having like I feel like there's other problems I would have with Batcat, like the skeleton mermaid thing, like the fact that those don't really exist. I feel like I'd start with that maybe rather than the non-binary thing is there being a problem.
Yeah, there's something, it was so interesting, Lisa, like, you're searching that word coming up, you know? Like, it's not a word that I think about when I'm working at all, but it's something, like, I guess, well, it's bringing a few things to mind. One is, I remember very early on in my writing career, finding a review of one of my YA novels that at the top, all it was a tally of every curse word in the novel. Like they went through, they pulled them out, they tallied them up, and that it was like a service that they were doing for people. And so I am used to my work being called inappropriate. But in terms of like appropriateness, I'm thinking about writing the Josephine series. She's the only kid in the apartment house. And so she's surrounded by all of these adults who are kind of having adult problems, and yet the problems are seen through Josephine's eyes, and also it's kind of a utopian setting. Like they're very loving neighbors who are respectful of Ella, and so I think, like in this second book, it's all about identity and someone having an identity crisis, and so there was this interesting kind of conversation I had with myself when I was working that's like, what is a kid's role when they confront an adult going through a really difficult experience? And what does the kid understand? How should the adult talk about it with the kid? Like I think it's really important to talk very like openly about human experiences, because regardless of your age, like we all go through similar experiences. So I don't know, it's such an intriguing question.
Well, Laila and I have lots more questions, but it's 11:30 and we want to make sure that there's time for you all to be able to ask your questions. So we're going to set up a mic so that you can ask questions of our fantastic panelists. And I just want to make sure that you're aware that they are available for signing their wonderful books. After we're done here, if you go through the doors in the back, they're going to be set up there. If you don't have their books, somewhere in this library you can buy them. Right outside that door, perfect. And they'll be happy to sign them for you. And so if you want to, if you have questions, you can line up here and we'll set up a mic for you. And if no one has questions, Laila and I can just keep going.
I'm guessing you've had this question before. What point or when in your life did you realize writing is what I want to do, it's my passion, I have to do it. And then how did you make the bridge from this thing I love doing to, oh my God, how am I going to get it out there in the world? And there's all these things that are in my way, and then here you are.
I wanted to be a marine biologist, but I failed all of my science classes. And this is a true story. I thought that I was going to be a scientist. I was a science kid. I didn't go to writing camps. I didn't even go to, I wasn't the art kid either. I really wanted to be a marine biologist or a vet, and then I went to college and it didn't go well. But at the time I was taking the one class that I took that I was really enjoying, and it means so much if you're just failing in so many other aspects of your life to have a class that you're doing well in. I took a comic class, and it was my favorite, and I'd always loved comics, but I'd never been inside of a comic shop. I think I only read the Funnies, which is an archaic thing that none of the children know about, but used to read comics in the newspaper, and I remember after failing one of my science classes going to my comic professor and being like, hey, what should I do with my life? And he was like, you should go to art school. And I was like, that's hilarious. What else have you got? And so I did go to art school, and I started drawing, and I used to teach kids comics, and I used to tell all of the kids that I taught comics, you guys are so far ahead of me already, because you guys are drawing, and if you guys keep drawing, you're going to take my job. Because I didn't start drawing until college, and it took a while. From that point, and then after that I went to grad school in comics, and I was saying that you can disappoint your parents with multiple degrees earlier, and I was pitching a bunch of different things, and I had a bunch of different comic things out, and it takes a really long time for you to get a foot in the door, and I think it took maybe 10 years for me being I'm gonna be a cartoonist and never have any money. And from that point to actually getting Batcat out. And then I only had, my first contract was just for Batcat's book 1 and 2, but they were like, would you want to do books 3 and 4? And I was like, yes, I do. So I was very lucky with that. And yeah, I don't know when there was a point where I was like, I definitely want to be a cartoonist. It was more well, this thing that I'm trying to do that I thought would make me happy isn't making me happy. But this other thing that I've just been trying is making me happy. So I'm gonna follow this and see where it takes me. And it's brought me here. It's been great.
Okay, wait a second. Excuse me, I have to interrupt here. Why on earth would you be a marine biologist? You're scared to death of water.
Okay, that is a fair assessment. That is a very good question. However, you can also go beachcombing. You could work at SeaWorld and just be
those sharks, they jump, they see
there was a movie back in the day, and I can't remember. It was
Jaws.
No, there was another one. It was with a basketball player, and there were sand sharks. Does anybody remember this movie? But Jesus, that made everything so much worse. I was like, they can be on land too. And yes, it is because of Jaws that I'm terrified of sharks.
Is it Sharknado?
No, it wasn't Sharknado.
I have the opposite story, which is not nearly as funny or cool, but I just always loved writing. It's always, writing and reading have always been the things that I have been really drawn to, and so I always knew it was what I wanted to do, and that doesn't make it easier. And every novel for me is challenging to write, and sometimes it feels more like work than the thing that I really love, but pushing through it is something I've learned how to do, and I feel, just happy that I get to do it, and it's what I hope I get to do forever.
I did not ever have any intention of being a writer. It seemed, I was a reader before I was anything. I was a reader, I was a fanatic reader. I read and read and read, and all of the other children, their parents would say, please read a book, and my mother would say, stop reading, go outside. And so I thought that writers were mythical and wonderful, and obviously not me. So I became an editor. I became an editor for many years. I was an editor for 12, 15, something like that, years. And then I finally thought the only difference between me and writers is that they're willing to call themselves writers. And so at that point, I thought, okay, I can do this. I went to school, I got certified, I have an MFA. And then in a totally uninspiring publishing story, I wrote a bunch of adult nonfiction, and then I had children, and I never talked to adults anymore. I never read adult books. I hung out with kids all the time, and I wrote a book for my daughter, and I called up my pal who was in the same company that I worked for, Chronicle Books, and she said, yeah, okay, great, I guess, send me the manuscript. And then I became a children's book author. The end.
Any other questions? Good.
Hi. I mean, you kind of just addressed this, so maybe if you want to elaborate, you're welcome to, but I was wondering about the age range that you're writing for, because you spoke about changing from adult nonfiction to children's books after becoming a parent, and I know you more as a YA author, so that switched to writing younger, and it sounds like from your answer before, maybe this is not the intended age that you were expecting to be reading a book, so I'm just curious, maybe not an appropriateness level, but why write this age range now in your careers?
I thought that I was writing for like middle grade when I'm writing for kids, and I think that I work in the book industry, and I also have these books out, and I also have a bunch of other friends who are in the industry, and writing for kids is so much more fun than writing for adults, because like especially like nonfiction, if you wanted to do like a historical thing, you've got to do research, and you gotta get out on the ground, or and then also like you don't get as like nearly as cool questions when you're writing for adult books. Like sometimes I had one kid who just was like, Batcat can't fly, they're too fat. And I was like, you know what? I should have drawn the wings bigger, like you're right. But like having skeleton mermaids and griffins and like a giant pink character is like something I think you can only really accomplished in kids' books. And I used to teach kids comics, and the stories that they came up with were the coolest thing. Like there was one where there was a war inside of a refrigerator, and it was like popcorn was fighting with onions. That was amazing. And then there was another, and I think about this comic at least like once a month. There was a kid who wrote a comic about a bunny who wanted to join a human dance studio, but they only allowed humans. So it went to the costume store and it bought a human suit, and then it got into the dance studio, and like that's just amazing. I just think that's fantastic. So I didn't think that I was writing for kids. I think I'm only gonna write for kids from this point forward because you guys are really cool. And yeah, I guess that's my answer. Kids comics rock.
I've been interested in writing for younger readers. So when I started writing YA, I was in my very early 20s, and so it felt, I remembered it really well, what it was like to be a teenager. And then I kept writing YA, and I was teaching high school at the time, and I kind of like stayed in that place. And I really wanted to do picture books, and a number of factors influenced that. One was I used to teach at Hamline University's MFA program, and so I would sit and hear these wonderful lectures about children's literature from these veteran picture book writers, and so that was inspiring and instructive. But mostly it was having my own child and having the experience of what it was like for her to be a kid, and kind of getting to like experience childhood all over again through her eyes, and so that helped a lot in terms of knowing what to write about. And then the Josephine series would not have existed without my daughter. Like during 2020, we had just moved into a new neighborhood. Like we moved from the East Bay back to San Francisco. And and then COVID struck 3 days after we got our house. And so my daughter and I, once we were able to go outside and roam around, we would go outside and we'd take all these walks, and it was deserted, and we made up all of these stories about who might live in these different houses, and what, imagine if there were two cute dogs frolicking in this park, what would their names be? And so we were kind of like constructing this imaginary neighborhood within our real neighborhood, because we hadn't gotten to meet the people yet. And so Josephine, the series just came from that and all of the ideas that we had walking around. And I have a book that that is in early stages, but with a 12-year-old. So it's like as my kid grows, like those ages are growing too. So it's been super fun. The last few years I've been devoting most of my time to this like big historical novel for adult readers. And then I'm also doing these fun children's, more whimsical books, and I love the balance.
You just said that you were doing the historical thing, but then you were working on the fun thing on the side. I'm saying that because my next book is like slightly historical, and I'm really dragging my feet on it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's intimidating, right? And then it's play. It feels really different.
I speak as one who has done this. I've written pretty much everything, pretty much. I've done adult nonfiction. I've done adult historical novel, 2 of them. I've done YA, mid-grade, these chapter books that we're talking about today, and picture books. And I would say I am moved by difficulty. I want to try it. If I can't do it, I want to try it. I think adults, not to diss you people, but honestly, I was out, like, just for the fun of hanging out with kids is just way higher than hanging out with adults. I was at this reading once, and this is to me is like the great metaphor of why I write for kids. Is I was on my way to a reading in Kansas City, and I live here. I was in Kansas City, and as I was walking across the street, bunnies were hopping alongside me. So I went rushing into the meeting of the reading that I was going to do. It was for adults. The whole place was packed with adults. And I just saw 2 bunnies. If I had said that to a kids group, the place would have cleared. We would have all gone to look for the bunnies, duh. And they just stared at me and waited for me to talk about something important. And I thought, I'm just not doing this anymore. So that's why I write for kids.
The bunny litmus test. How excited is your crowd about bunnies?
I don't even have to give kids a litmus system. I said there's 2 bunnies outside. I expect you guys to leave,
Well, we only have like 2 minutes left, so we probably have time for one more question.
Yeah. All right. So my inner children. So advice from all and our cinnamon girls on stage, so you're writing, for the grown-ups in the room that have loads of kid stories within, but never cracked into the so-called field of literary publications. So for those of us, I know I have a lot of adults in here that are writing stories for kids. Well, how is it that you got started? How did you get published?
What's that inspiring you to go? I did the very traditional route. I wrote a book. I queried agents. I wrote a query letter, and when I felt like, I wrote a book. I edited the book. I got feedback on the book. I made it as good as I possibly could, that I could do by myself. And then I queried agents, and then I got an agent, and then she sent it out to publishers, and then I got a book deal. So no magic to it, just following the traditional route.
I used to work at the Escapist comic book shop, which is around here. Yeah, it's great. And I was a stellar employee and definitely didn't spend the majority of my time reading comics when I was there. But because I was reading comics all the time, I noticed that there was a comic that didn't exist yet, which was a history of the Olympics. And my partner's family goes to the Olympics. I'm not a sports person. Don't ask me sports questions. But I also thought that the Olympics, they just kind of grabbed whoever was outside and brought them inside for the events, but that's not the case. So I've gone to the Olympics with my partner's family, and it's this very interesting experience, and I was like, well, there isn't a comic about this, I could probably spin this. And so I turned that into a pitch, and I sent it to an agent, and she was like, oh, this is fantastic, this isn't something I've read before, we'll definitely make this happen. And she found a publisher, and they're like, oh, this is amazing. We'll give you this book deal, and you will go to the Olympics this year, the year of 2020, where nothing bad will happen. So that book hasn't come out yet. But I'm really bad at not having a project. I have to constantly be working. I have to be constantly swimming like a shark, or I'll die. And because I didn't have, the Olympic comic had kind of stalled out, I started working on Batcat, and luckily that was like the next step. Is they were like, all right, well, we trust you enough because you put together this one, so we'll do this other one. So I think my advice is like, look at what is already out in the market and see like what hasn't been represented yet and what hasn't happened and what needs the story to be told. And I think that people will like gobble that up a little bit faster.
Are you still doing the Olympic?
That's the historical comic that I'm working on now. I can tell you so much about like Olympic history. I can name like 2 athletes, maybe. So that's why I'm like, oh man, the fun one is the kid one where I got skeleton mermaid.
That is about our time. So.
Okay, thank you guys so